Hello, and welcome to episode 12 of Sorastro's The Lord of the Rings painting series. In this episode we're going to paint the giant spiders, cave trolls, and the Nameless Things from the Shadowed Paths expansion to Fantasy Flight Games' The Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. To paint the monsters, I'm returning to some nice simple speed painting techniques, like those that were introduced back in the very first episode of the series. The basis of the approach is that we apply thinned layers of colour over a zenithal pattern of light and shade. And this time I'll be using the Citadel contrast colours to help speed things along. Here's a quick look at the painting stages. Before adding any colour, I've prepared the miniatures exactly as described back in episode 1, which means firstly priming them in black, followed with some grey then white zenithal highlights applied from a halo above to achieve a nice easy pattern of light and shade. I've also then provided a white dry brush to further sharpen up the textures. This is a useful way to catch some of the details that might otherwise have been left black, such as we can see on the underside of the spiders. I've prepared all of the monsters in a box like this, and will be covering the remaining enemy types in a future guide. Next I'm going to provide all of the main colours using the Citadel contrast paints, where I'll be doing plenty of wet blending to achieve some quick and easy gradations of tone. I'll then finish each monster off with a range of additional finishing touches that might include painting some of the smaller details using regular paints, as well as adding some special effects. And I'm going to add a few optional highlights, some basing, and some touches of weathering. I'm going to cover the 3 monster types in turn, starting with the Nameless Things, and you can find chapter links in the video description to help with navigation. Let's begin. There's quite a wide range of tones in the contrast colours range, and the levels of opacity and concentration also varies quite a bit from colour to colour, so it's worth getting to know their individual properties. For the main area of skin on the Nameless Things, I've chosen to blend some Plaguebearer Flesh, Magos Purple, and Volupus Pink. The paints can be used neat directly from the bottle or from a palette. I'm starting with the Volupus Pink, which you can see has a strong, vibrant tone, and I'm using this to colour the back of this worm-like creature. Many of these creatures lack precise visual description in Tolkien's writing, so you should feel free to experiment with whatever colour schemes you like. You could also vary the colours of the individual monsters within each group. It's mainly in the interests of speed and uniformity that I chose to paint mine the same. I'm now using the Magos Purple to paint the frontal area of skin. You can see that this is a lot thinner and less concentrated compared to the Volupus Pink. This means the tone will appear a fair bit lighter, and will be easier for me to tint with the Plaguebearer Flesh in a moment. You can see that the translucency of the paint allows the underlying pattern of light and shade to show through nicely. I'm now applying a little of the Plaguebearer Flesh to the appendages at the front, and a little to the tip of the nose and mouth area. The reasonably slow drying time of the paints means they're pretty easy to work with on the miniature, and we have a fair bit of time to blend the tones, or soak up excess paint from any areas where we might want less coverage. I'm not too worried about hitting details like the teeth and claws, as I'll be painting them with some regular opaque colours in a moment. For the inside of the mouth, I'm going to use some of the Volupus Pink, but we'll also drop in some Shyish Purple, which has a deep purplish black tone. I'm now tidying up the rocks with some regular white paint, which I accidentally hit with the pink. And to give them some colour, I'm using some Gryph-Charger Grey and some Basilicanum Grey. I'm first applying some of the bluish Gryph-Charger Grey, focusing on the upper half. And then some of the darker Basilicanum Grey just at the base of the rocks. To finish the Nameless Things off, I'm going to first mix a brownish grey tone and use this to paint the claws, teeth and the small spines on the back. I'm highlighting these up quite quickly to pure ivory. Here I'm just dropping some additional contrast paint into the recesses between some of the teeth. And I've chosen to add a little black lining to the base of the claws. One more fun optional touch is to use some UHU glue to add some saliva. All I'm doing is stretching this between the teeth, and you could use whatever you like to do this, such as a cocktail stick. I'm now applying a little dark earth basing paste to what ground there is, followed with a wash of Agrax Earthshade. And I'm painting the rim of the base using Scalecolor's flat black. And this completes the Nameless Things, so I'm now moving on to the giant spiders. For the spiders, I've chosen to have a play with the following tones to create quite a wide-ranging gradient, although you could certainly get away with using fewer colours if you like. I'm starting with the Aethermatic Blue and using this to paint most of the top of the body. After giving the brush a quick wipe, I'm now darkening the sides using Terradon Turquoise, letting the colours run into one another. I've now decided to try a little of the Leviadon Blue to go darker still. Here I'm moving on to the legs, and I've decided to create a gradient going from light at the raised joints and getting darker towards the end and base of each leg. For the underside of the spider, I started with the Leviadon Blue, then decided to go even darker with some Shyish Purple. I now want to introduce a hint of the Plaguebearer Flesh, which I've chosen to thin down with some contrast medium. I'm applying this to the lightest topmost part of the body, and a touch to each of the raised leg joints. I'm now applying the basing as described back in episode 1, which means applying my basing paste and cork rocks. Followed with a light dry brush, a brown wash using Aggaros Earthshade, and some tufts of grass by Gamer's Grass. Once dry, I've chosen to further darken the spiders down a little with some additional Leviadon Blue, which I'm thinning with some contrast medium to control the concentration. I'm just using this to deepen the mid to shadow tones. For the finishing touches, I'm now painting the eyes using Vallejo's black. And I'm hitting each of the leg joints with a small touch of Ivory to sharpen the definition. And finally, I'm brushing over the eyes with a little gloss varnish. With the spiders complete, let's now move on to the cave trolls. For the cave trolls, I'd like to achieve a more subtle range of tones in the skin, so I'm going to start with a roughly equal mix of Creed Camo and Gryph-Charger Grey for the shadow tone, and for the highlights I'm using a roughly equal mix of Plaguebearer Flesh and Skeleton Horde. I'm simply placing the darker tone in all of the areas of shadow, and the lighter tone for the areas of highlight, and loosely blending the two on the figure. Regular viewers will know how I like to vary the hue as well as just light values when building up highlights in layers. Here I'm just achieving a similar effect a lot more quickly by wet blending the shadow and highlight tones directly on the miniature. I've now chosen to introduce some of the Magos Purple into the face area. Additional layers can be added to strengthen the saturation if needed. I've also chosen to introduce some of the purple to places like the knuckles and elbows. I'm now going to paint the patches of scaly skin using an equal mix of Gryph-Charger Grey and Black Templar. I'm working with some care here, as making repairs to the surrounding skin tone could be quite tricky. I'm now moving on to the leather, where I'm going to first do a bit of tidying up with some white. I'm also using this to sharpen up a few of the edges, and to provide a boost to some of the highlights before I apply the colour. There's quite an effective assortment of leathery brown tones in the contrast colours range that we could use. Here I'm using some Wyldwood and Aggaros Dunes for example. Snakebite Leather also has quite a rich tone. Here I'm using some Shyish Purple to darken the shadows. For the bone club, I'm using Skeleton Horde, which I'm going to thin with some medium on the model as necessary to lighten the tone. You could pretty much now add some basing and call this done if you like. I'm going to take things a little further by firstly using some pale buff or ivory tones to add some scratchy highlights to the leather. might also add a little green, in this case some fluorescent green I happen to have on the palette. I'm also stippling a little random noise and texture onto the bone. I'm now painting the nails using a buff and ivory mix. I might also use this to add a few small highlights to the skin. Additional layers of the contrast colour can be used to further darken the leather. And here I'm just mixing some flat red with some black to add a few spots of blood. I'm now dotting in some eyes using Deck Tan. I'm providing the basing in between additional finishing touches, such as brightening the teeth with some ivory. And here I'm adding some additional touches of blood and random bits of noise and dirt. I've also chosen to increase the tonal variation in the skin by brushing some Magos Purple over the knuckle area. Here I'm thinning the purple down and using it to provide a more subtle tint to some of the shadows and midtones elsewhere on the model. And I'm now finishing the cave troll off with a few final bright highlights. And this completes the Nameless Things, Giant Spiders and Cave Trolls. Thank you for watching. As always, you can find chapter links and a product list in the video description below, along with all of the places I can be reached on social media. My very special thanks go to the kind patrons for supporting this work. If you'd like to become a patron, you can find out more by hitting the Patreon link. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from the Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. Happy painting!